It's been a long road, getting from there to here.
Strange New Worlds Episode Review. I would like the review to go now. Welcome, my friends. We are back once again to discuss Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2, all the way up to Episode 5, this one entitled Charades, aka Star Trek Strange New Worlds, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Episode. You see, this was one of those episodes that just, after a while, I had to just shut everything off and go with it. But before we get into everything, there will be spoilers ahead. Consider this your final warning. If you don't want those, duck out, come back later, or consider yourself warned. Let's crack on. So this episode, the synopsis says, a shuttle accident leads to Spock's Vulcan DNA being removed by aliens, making him fully human and completely unprepared to face T'Pring's family during an important ceremonial dinner. This episode does get a little zany, I guess you could say, a little bonkers, a little out there. I do realize at the beginning of the season they said this season was filled with wild swings, and I just have to say this is probably one of those. If you can remember back to season 1, there was a fairly zany body swap adventure with T'Pring, so it seems like that's the primary use of her character in this series, at least so far, is to have these weird, wacky adventures between Spock and T'Pring. And before I get to all the weirdness of the episode, one thing I really did enjoy is the way they did this. However, it didn't feel very Star Trek-y. It felt quite a bit like Doctor Who, and probably because I'm thinking of, what was that episode? The Are You My Mummy episode, where the nanites repaired somebody, but they didn't have a baseline idea of what a human is, so it repaired them the best way possible, which isn't the correct way, and it seems like that's similar to what's going on here. We pick up a tiny, almost imperceptible plot thread from earlier episodes about Chapel applying for a Vulcan mission, some sort of research fellowship or something for the Vulcan Science Institute, and this is the episode where she finally puts forth her name, I guess, and has to do an interview and all that stuff. So that's kind of like one of the very mini side plots going on, but it is nice to have that subtle tie to something that's been referenced before. They're going to Vulcan to do some sort of research, and this is where things started to fall down logically for me. In an episode where Spock gets turned into a full human and basically loses his logic and embraces emotion, it's kind of interesting that the episode overall kind of just did away with logic as far as their world building and consistency, but maybe that was unintentional and I'm just reading more into it. So they go to the Vulcan system to study a moon with a long dead or a long missing, a long gone sentient species that had advanced technology, advanced medicine, all of those things. It seems a little disingenuous to me, and I know if you've been watching my videos, I've used that word quite a bit recently, so I'm sorry about it. How has this not been explored by Vulcans over their tenure of controlling that planetary system? But it seems like the fact that they run into this energy vortex, this I don't know what you call it, a temporal anomaly, something along the lines of a gateway to another dimension or a trans-dimensional portal. How has this thing just gone unnoticed on a planet that's within the vicinity of the planet Vulcan? Sorry, it was a moon, not a planet. It just seems like that would be us as the Federation down the line, not having explored Venus and suddenly finding an ancient civilization that still has working computers there, and oh, hey, the Andorians just found that over there. Could you believe it? I'm beating on a point because it doesn't really impact the story. It just kind of comes out of left field and feels unearned, I suppose you could say. I have to imagine the reason it was set in the Vulcan system is because they wanted to find a reason to get Spock and crew back to Vulcan for this T'Pring storyline, which is the intent and the purpose of this episode, so I'm not going to fault them too much. That just did stretch my imagination a little bit. So what happens when they actually get to this moon to conduct their study as well? Chapel and Spock take a shuttlecraft out to investigate. It was originally going to be apparently just a one-person mission, just Spock and the shuttle alone, which I don't feel like seems like a good idea anyways, to only have a single person on this mission. Chapel joins him because she's trying to get experience for this Vulcan fellowship, so that makes a little sense. Obviously, there's been some awkward tension between them. There is an accident, something happens, they find this swirling vortex, they start getting pulled inside, then we cut to black and basically Spock is waking up in sickbay on the Enterprise, fully human, and this is where the silliness and the shenanigans and the zaniness ensue for most of the rest of the episode, because he is now having to deal with the fact that he is fully human, fully unprepared for that. He has to go through all the ordeals. They liken it to Spock being a human teenager, having to deal with all these conflicting emotions and bursts of hormones and blah, blah, blah. And that is what happens throughout the episode. He's having trouble dealing with it. He's having interactions with the crew he doesn't normally have to have. And then we get this little back and forth scene in a montage where at the beginning of the episode we got to see Spock interacting with his crewmates in more personal situations and not really interacting or feeling he's up to it. And then we get to see the same interactions later on after he becomes fully human. It seems a little odd that they were having the same interactions both before and after, but that's just a storytelling technique, so I don't fault it too much. And it was nice to see our characters interacting outside of their duties, although one thing that does feel a little bit off with Strange New Worlds is even when these characters are on duty, they're acting basically like they're off duty. Again, minor nitpick. It's something that's kind of going throughout the course of the season. It's just that slight lack of professionalism, but maybe that's just the way Pike likes to run his ship. We have a nice scene where La'an is kind of explaining to Spock what it's like to be a teenager going through this. I didn't hate the scene, but throughout the entirety of it, something was niggling in the back of my head, and I just couldn't get over the fact that that should have been Una. That should have been a scene between Una and Spock. We know they had a pretty good relationship with each other, and we haven't actually had much of an interaction between them at all this season, and I think that would have been the perfect place to place that instead of having it be La'an. I know La'an is kind of played up as the main character a lot during this show, but I think that would have been a great Una and Spock scene, because primarily, even during her courtroom episode, Una has been fairly absent. T'Pring is coming aboard to do a Vulcan fiancé ritual or something, a bonding of the families that needs to occur so that the mother can approve of the husband, or at least in this case, it was T'Pring's mother who was having the problem and not the father. Maybe it was both parents had to agree to this and the father was just lackadaisically like, cool, man. He seemed very un-Vulcan, but that might have been the way we were meant to feel to showcase just how Enterprise-level Vulcan the mother of T'Pring was. And that brings me up to another thing. There were heavy callbacks to T'Pol type stuff here, especially the fact that Vulcans need to numb their nose because humans smell horrible to them, especially the fact that female Vulcans experience this extra more sensitively, and that was a poorly worded sentence. So that was a nice callback even indirectly to Enterprise, and I like when they tie those things in because that show needs more love. And it was also nice to see Sam Kirk for 6.27 seconds in this episode, even if he was played for a laugh, played for a joke, because he was a messy eater and kept leaving crumbs on the table, and that led human Spock to have an outburst and freak out. I do enjoy these outbursts from Spock, and that's why I partially call this How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Episode. If you take this episode on a canonized Star Trek logical, everything needs to fit consistently within this predetermined world of all the canon and all that's come before, all that'll come later, you're probably going to take some issues with it. But somewhere towards the third to the middle of this episode, I just had this switch go off in my brain where it's just like, I'm not going to care about any of that anymore. I'm just going to lean back and enjoy this episode for what it is. And then it worked. I just did enjoy the episode for what it was, and I let all of the concerns just drift away. And this might not be everyone's cup of tea, because I know this is a very subjective type of humor. But for me, it ended up working, even though there were a few scenes that were just over the top cringy. I just happened to enjoy it. Maybe it's because I didn't enjoy last episode as much as most people did. You can't take it all super seriously, and I like that this episode did that. However, it leads me to a feeling that maybe next episode's going to be dramatic and heavy. The scene with Spock dealing with T'Pring's family was nice. I'm not sure why Pike was there cooking for them. I mean, I understand the fact that he is Spock's closest friend on board and that he is a captain trying to play a good host, and his whole ideology apparently is cooking is what I do. It just felt a little weird to have him thrown into the mix, and maybe they were doing that because they didn't bring Sarek back, which leads me to my other point. They brought in Amanda Grayson, Spock's mother, and this leads me to something also about Strange New Worlds as a whole. Does every single person, guest star, main character, everyone in this show have to be the most gorgeous and beautiful person on Earth? I mean, Star Trek was supposed to be aspirational, but I cannot see myself standing next to any of the people who have ever appeared in the show because they're all pinnacles of human beauty, and I can't stand it. So could they throw in a slightly overweight guy, maybe? Well, they did once in the last episode or a couple episodes ago where Uhura berated her. It was also nice to have things work well. Spock was able to bluff his way through. He got to learn from his mother how to lie. It was nice to see Spock able to give her those emotional reactions towards the end of the episode that he was never able to do while he was pretending or trying to be the most Vulcan-y Vulcan ever. And it was good. I feel like that was a much needed scene between them. However, those are the types of things that I'm sure, had they mind melded, he could have conveyed to her anyways. It was just nice to see this, and it was a much needed moment. It was a nice touch here to say that Spock is not currently speaking to Sarek, and that is why he wasn't here. Obviously, that matches up to later canon, but the way they've kind of been shuffling things around with the whole time travel thing earlier wouldn't necessarily be out of character to bring him in, but it was nice to play on these preconceived notions of what's coming up. And that leads to the end of this whole encounter where, because Spock chose last minute to hide the situation from T'Pring, she felt that he is not trusting of her and that they need to take some time apart. So I guess this is not the beginning of their issues, because it's clear that they've had issues since the introduction of these characters, and we know they're going to continue having issues, but it was nice for things to come to a head, which leads to that kiss we saw in the trailer between Chapel and Spock. And I don't know how I feel about this. Obviously, we knew it was coming. I personally thought it might have involved some sort of being under the influence or an early Ponfar situation, but no. After this, we need a break situation with T'Pring. Spock is technically single now and goes to Chapel and tells her, you know, I know you have feelings for me. I kind of have feelings for you, so let's deal with this. That was interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about that. We'll have to see how they play it out, because we know in TOS there's this one-sided situation going on, so how do things come to a head after this? I've dealt with a lot of the romance and the relationship stuff. The part that really interests me as a sci-fi story, as a Doctor Who type story like I mentioned, are these aliens from an advanced civilization that transcended, ascended, moved to another part of interdimensional galaxy or something. They left behind these, in my opinion, I don't think it was ever actually stated, these high-tech automaton type things that are responsible for taking care of any situations. I'm choosing to believe these were some sort of high-end AI, I guess you could say, because they found the crashed shuttle. Spock was damaged. They only had Chapel as a template, so they only had her to compare him to, which is why they repaired him as a full human, because they didn't have a template for a Vulcan. Again, being in the Vulcan system seems a little odd, but whatever. The other thing I don't necessarily understand is why they didn't also repair him as a female human. Probably that would have been too much in getting in profit and lace situations, but that is something that went through my mind. I love this idea. The fact that it was so nearby to Vulcan was a little odd, but I do really like these ancient, advanced, weird alien cultures in Star Trek that don't really get a lot of exploration, because that adds a nice mysterious touch to a universe that sometimes can feel a little too well explored. And I like that, because we don't get a definitive answer on who they are. We don't get a real idea of their culture or their civilization. It was a misunderstanding. It's a technology. It's all these things that are so limited in their explanation that leaves theorizing and the mysteries of this world on heightened alert. And I really like that in not just Star Trek, but sci-fi in general. So I'm kind of glad they didn't give us all the answers right off the top. Again, I have to bring it up. No Pelia for another episode straight. She's now appeared in the pilot for the season, which makes sense. We got a little bit with her there, and we got a little bit more with her in the Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow time travel episode, which I feel is the reason they introduced her to begin with, but they're just not doing anything with her. And I say that, but they're also not doing much with our other characters. Like, Pike has had one episode, really, to actually do much. He had a little bit here as well. Una has had her courtroom episode, but she hasn't had much to do. Ortega's had a little bit last episode. Uhura hasn't had a dedicated episode yet. M'Benga and Chapel and La'an have kind of been played with throughout. But it seems like, I don't know, they're not giving each of our characters a significant amount of stuff to do, which was fine when you had a 22 episode series. It's not like we saw Pelia in the background or something. She was gone. She's been gone for a couple of episodes, not even a shot with her. She was mentioned that she went off to buy dilithium, which seemed a little odd also, but I don't know, it just seems like they're not fully utilizing the characters they have, and perhaps it's scheduling conflicts or something like that, but it just doesn't quite feel like a lived-in ship the way it should, with all of these characters intermingling and just being there at all times. I digress. That's not a huge issue. A lot of my issues with this episode aren't huge issues, to the point where I let them all go and really enjoyed it as an overall work of just fun, I guess you could say. There wasn't too much to take too seriously. There was fun implications with the aliens. Obviously, there's romantic complications going forward, but it was just, I don't know, I just had fun. And I guess at the end of the day, that's really what I'm looking for. But what did you guys think of this episode? How are you feeling about Strange New Worlds? Was this a step up, a step down, kind of a lateral movement? And where do you think things are going based on the revelations with the Spock-Chapel relationship and anything else from this episode or any of the other episodes? Leave all your thoughts down below. Like, share, subscribe, throw me some money, do all those YouTube things. But until next time...
Are you my